Welcome, and thank you for joining today's teleconference, FEMA Hurricane Ian Federal Response and Recovery Update. Please note that all lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of today's call. Please welcome Mr. Michael Hart, FEMA Media Brand Chief. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you, ma'am, and good morning, everyone. This is Michael Hart. Thanks for joining us today to discuss federal response updates to Hurricane Ian. Our speakers today will be FEMA Assistant Administrator for Response and Recovery, Ms. Ann Bink, Commanding General of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, South Atlantic Division, Brigadier General Daniel Hibner, Commander of the 7th Coast Guard District, Rear Admiral Brendan McPherson. We also have American Red Cross Senior Director of Integrated Field Communications, Mr. Anthony Tornetta, and we'll have a weather update from Mr. Michael Musher of the National Weather Service. All remarks this morning will be on the record. We'll begin with the weather update, followed by a FEMA operations update from Ms. Bink, then updates from General Hibner, Admiral McPherson, and finally Mr. Tornetta before opening the line for questions. In the interest of time, please limit your questions to topics regarding Hurricane Ian, with one follow-up question if necessary. For any additional questions, I'll be providing the FEMA News Desk contact information at the end of this call. I will now turn it over to Mr. Musher for the weather report, followed by Ms. Bink and other updates as noted.
Okay, thank you. This is Michael Musher. I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service Operations Center. I just wanted to speak real quickly on yesterday. Ian made landfall around 2:05 p.m. Eastern Time near Georgetown, South Carolina, as a Category 1 hurricane. And as of 11 a.m., just a few minutes ago, the current position of Ian was about 160 miles west-southwest of Richmond, Virginia, as a post-tropical cyclone at this point. Just wanted to briefly mention that there are 9 river gauges right now indicating record flooding across Florida. The Peace River and rivers in the western part of the state are cresting and will slowly begin to recede but remain above major flood stage levels into the middle part of next week. The St. Johns River and rivers in central and eastern northeastern Florida will continue to rise and remain at record levels into the middle of next week before slow recession begins. There's also major river flooding and coastal flooding ongoing this morning in portions of southeastern Virginia near the Tidewater area and in northeastern North Carolina. Concerning the weather forecast over the next 2 to 3 days here, the main factor or main impacts from what's left of Ian, the remnants of Ian, is going to be locally heavy rainfall from the central Appalachians through parts of the mid-Atlantic and maybe up into portions of southern New England. That does include potentially the New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. metro areas. We could see maybe 1 to 3 inch rainfall amounts over the next few days. Right now, the precipitation looks pretty scattered. We're not expecting real concentrated organized areas of heavy rainfall right now other than over the central Appalachians today. So it's going to be just like a decaying system over the next few days. And I finally wanted to mention that even though the system's decaying, we're still seeing some heavy rainfall, there could be some coastal impacts across the northeast and mid-Atlantic coastal areas with onshore flow and coastal flooding, rip currents, maybe some gale force winds. But otherwise, the good news, the system's decaying very rapidly. We're just expecting some impacts from rainfall and coastal marine issues. And the final thing I wanted to mention was Florida and the southeastern portion of the country that was really impacted by Ian. The weather forecast looks really, really good. Over the next 4 to 5 days, really very limited chances of precipitation, and it should be clear skies, sunny skies for recovery and aftermath effects with Ian across that portion of the country. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions or comments.
All right, thank you, sir. Now we'll go over to General Hibner from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. South Atlantic Division Corps of Engineers continues our response efforts in Puerto Rico as well as in Florida, and we're monitoring the situation in South Carolina, in the Carolinas in general. In Florida specifically, as we respond to Hurricane Ian, we have infrastructure assessment teams that are responding throughout the area. Right now, we're focused on infrastructure assessments and critical public facility support at the Lee County Water Distribution Center. And so we're partnering with the local county and area public works to help find resolution to that. And for power generation, which is probably our priority mission here in Florida, we're providing temporary power as required, and we have temporary emergency power teams that are establishing operations first in South Florida, and we're establishing a generating staging base as we speak, with the first generators arriving last night. We believe that southernmost generating staging base will be operational today. We'll have a second one, as they're receiving generators right now in Avon Park, will be initially operational capable this evening, and as necessary, we're prepared to establish another operating base for temporary emergency power further north into Florida. We also have another temporary emergency power team that is being held in reserve that can reinforce our efforts here in Florida, or we can divert them into the Carolinas if that would become necessary. We're prepared to conduct and initiate Blue Roof operations if that becomes necessary. Our call center is ready to activate, and we can begin Blue Roof operations if that is deemed necessary within 24 hours of notification. It will take time to get our contractors mobilized, but we will be able to at least initiate Blue Roof operations once we're ordered to do so if it is required. We're prepared to provide debris, subject matter experts, and quality assurance reps if necessary, and if FEMA requires our assistance in that effort. We're working with the U.S. Coast Guard right now to continue surveying priorities going to major ports and then to other federal navigation systems and channels. One of our surveying efforts right now is in the Sanibel area, and we got our survey vessel in the water just this morning so we can begin helping to establish what would be obstacles, potential limitations in navigation in the water in the vicinity of Sanibel, in order to have a better understanding of what we're up against in terms of establishing ferrying operations to support movement of persons that are still on the island, or however the state deemed necessary. We're also aware of the upper Kissimmee overflows and inundation that's happening there, and we are responding. We're sending a team of experts to do an assessment of what is happening there, and we will determine if there's a need to do any dewatering operations. And that's my overview. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll go over to Ms. Bink from FEMA.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Yesterday, post-tropical cyclone Ian continued to cause impacts as it made a second landfall and continued inland, and that second landfall was near Georgetown, South Carolina. In anticipation of the storm's continued impacts, the President did approve emergency declarations for both South Carolina and North Carolina, which provides direct federal assistance for emergency protective measures, as well as reimbursement for those actions taken by those states. Overnight, a major disaster declaration was also approved for the Seminole Tribe of Florida for individual assistance, public assistance for categories A and B, including direct federal assistance, as well as hazard mitigation. Across Florida, impact assessments are ongoing, and response and recovery efforts continue. Administrator Criswell and our Region 4 Administrator Gracia Check are on the ground in Florida assessing the situation today. Our priorities today continue to be focused on search and rescue operations, emergency debris removal, commodity distribution, and power and water restoration. Our search and rescue operations are continuing today by land, air, and sea. We remain in close contact with our state and tribal emergency managers in Florida so that we can respond immediately to requests for assistance. Our urban search and rescue teams with swiftwater capabilities continue to conduct rescue operations on island on-island communities isolated by the storm. Overnight, 4 counties were also added to the major disaster declaration for Florida. Those are Flagler, Putnam, St. John's, and Volusia, for a total of 17 counties approved. This provides assistance for individuals and families, as well as assistance for emergency work, including debris removal. This includes 100% federal cost share for 30 days beginning September 23rd. We're actively collecting data on the ground as we speak from additional counties, so we can continue to add those to the major disaster declaration to advance eligibility for assistance. Survivors can register in those approved counties online at disasterassistance.gov, via phone, which is 1-800-621-FEMA or 1-800-621-3362, or by using the FEMA app. Although we're in the middle of the response, we've already established a strong leadership team ready to lead recovery missions as soon as we're called up. FEMA employees are on the ground in shelters, providing assistance to survivors and registering them for individual assistance. When it comes to health and medical, we are assessing the needs of critical facilities like hospitals, adult care facilities, and dialysis centers to understand their impacts and needs and how we can best support them. As of 8 a.m. this morning, there are 1.3 million customers without power in Florida, and as I'm sure you're aware, there are 44,000 personnel through mutual aid staged across Florida and neighboring states to assist with restoration activities in the power sector. As the Army Corps briefed, power restoration teams are mobilized. We also have 238 generators staged to support that effort along the eastern seaboard as necessary. FEMA currently has 2,000 employees on the ground in the affected areas, and that includes our national incident management assistance teams. I ask that you continue to amplify our messaging. It's important for residents to stay focused on safety, generators to be used outdoors only as they pose a risk if used incorrectly, to stay off roads, and evacuated residents should not return until local officials say it is safe to do so. It's never safe to drive or walk through floodwaters, and residents should be aware of down power lines, standing waters, and other hidden hazards. We urge residents to take photographs or video to document their storm damage. That'll help expedite the assistance process moving forward. I'm standing by to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker will be Admiral McPherson, 7th Coast Guard District. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. As the moderator indicated, I'm Rear Admiral Brendan McPherson. I'm the commander of the Coast Guard 7th District, which encompasses the southeastern United States, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we have been responding to several hurricanes in the past few weeks, first starting with Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico, earlier this week with Hurricane Ian in Florida, and then just overnight with Hurricane Ian in South Carolina. I'm going to focus my remarks this morning on Florida and the impacts that we're seeing here, but happy to answer any questions you have on Coast Guard response to Puerto Rico or South Carolina. So let me begin with our priorities. Prior to, during, and after the storm, our number one priority has been saving lives. So we've been conducting search and rescue operations alongside our federal, local, and state partners, including the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Teams and the Florida National Guard. Since early hours of just after landfall, we had aircraft in the air before sunrise, and since then, Coast Guard aircraft and shallow water rescue teams have rescued more than 400 people. I think it's approximately 4,000 people who have been rescued and assistance from the entire unified command that has responded. In addition to saving lives, but let me just mention on that, we're in our third day of doing those operations. What I can tell you right now on the search and rescue side of things is that we are seeing far few cases of people who are in urgent need of medical assistance in our search and rescue cases, and more people who are simply stranded. Now, that's a challenging situation, but we're working with our unified command team here to address those concerns. Our second priority has been and continues to be reopening our ports and waterways. There are 39 critical ports in the state of Florida. I'm happy to tell you that we've been able to open all of those ports except for Fort Myers, the area that was hit the hardest. That is not a traditional commercial port. And last night, we did reopen the ports of Tampa, St. Pete, and Manatee with the support and assistance of the Army Corps of Engineers and NOAA. In addition to that, a third priority is pollution response. We have teams in the air and on the water assessing pollution throughout the area. As you can imagine, there is a lot of debris, a lot of vessels that are capsized in the water or grounded on shore and in the mangroves. Most of those vessels are small amounts of spills, gasoline, diesel that typically dissipate on their own. But we are assessing the area. We have specially trained teams on the ground and in the region that can respond to any spill. And then beyond that, we're also focusing on reconstitution Coast Guard operations. So we had a station, Fort Myers, one of our rescue stations in Fort Myers, that was in a temporary facility that was destroyed. We are currently sending a mobile command post to the area to reestablish our operations down there. We're also building out our national maritime distress system in the region. We have a couple of, think of them as antennas that receive distress calls that were destroyed, and we have mobile towers that are en route, and we hope to have that system back up soon. In the meantime, we have a cutter offshore, a Coast Guard ship that is able to monitor VHF, very high frequency, channel 16, which is the distress call system, should we get any calls for that. Beyond that, I would just like to say here at the Florida EOC, I've been very honored to work with the professionals here from the state of Florida, led by the Director of Emergency Management, Kevin Guthrie, along with the Florida National Guard, Major General Efert, and the FEMA Regional Administrator, Gracia Sheck. It really has been a true unified effort to respond to the needs of the people of Florida. And with that, I'll be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Admiral. Now over to Mr. Tornetta from the brief from Red Cross.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by saying our hearts continue to go out to everybody who's been impacted by Hurricane Ida from Florida up through the Carolinas. And the American Red Cross continues to work with our partners around the clock to provide people a safe place to stay. Shelter is our top priority right now because as people need to get out of harm's way. We strongly encourage people as they continue to either go back home and realize they don't have a place to go, or they still don't have power in their homes, to visit an emergency shelter, get something to eat, get some information. We encourage you to charge your devices so that if you're out for multiple hours on the day, you don't run out of power and you have connectivity if you have connectivity. And check in and get some health services. Make sure you're getting the medicines and the prescription eyewear and things that you need that maybe you lost as you moved through the storm. We currently have hundreds of volunteers on the ground across the impacted areas trying to provide some sort of normalcy to a really unnormal situation. The size and scope of this storm is not anything that any individual can or should have to prepare for. But here we are in this type of situation. We have dozens of American Red Cross emergency response vehicles that are beginning to get out into the communities, providing meals for those that are starting to clean up. And we have dozens more that will be arriving this weekend. We know that people are struggling. We know that people are working side by side with our community partners to help those that have been impacted as quickly as possible. I can assure you that in the days and weeks and months ahead, the American Red Cross will continue to provide support for those impacted. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that, we're all here together in this response effort. We're with those that have been impacted, and we want you to know that we're going to be providing care and hope as we move forward. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you all for those updates. We're now ready to take questions. As a reminder, please provide your name and outlet before asking your question. I'm going to turn it back over to the moderator at this time.
Please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and your question. Again, pressing pound 2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. Let's go to the first question in the queue. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Amy Howler from AccuWeather. I was just wondering if you could tell me a question I just really hate to even ask, but how many fatalities we have at this point?
Hi. Yeah, unfortunately at this time, we do know of 23 confirmed fatalities in Florida. We know there's media reports of others. Our state partners are working to continue to confirm the validity of those reports, but unfortunately right now we do know of 23.
Thank you so much.
Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Gloria Gonzalez from Politico. 2 questions. First on Florida. Can you tell us the exact locations for those temporary generator staging bases in Florida that are going to be operational today?
Yeah, I can follow up with the detail on where the generators are moving right now. I don't have those details at my fingertips.
Okay. The other question is regarding Puerto Rico. If we could get an update on the Coast Guard operations there and what's the priorities there following Fiona?
Yeah, good morning. It's Admiral McPherson. So we've been able to draw down our active search and rescue operations in Puerto Rico. We are really more focused now on supporting FEMA with any of their mission assignments. We had aircraft there as well up in the air shortly after Fiona made landfall. The good news there is we had very few search and rescue cases. I do know that other agencies did respond to folks that were trapped, inland, mostly inland. But as far as on the maritime side of things, we had very few cases. So we're sort of back to normal operations, if you will. That said, we had many of our Coast Guard families and members down there that were impacted with the rest of the community. I mean, that's what's somewhat unique about the Coast Guard is not only are we first responders, but we are, federal first responders, but we are woven into the community. These are our friends and neighbors, and we're seeing that in Florida here as well. So we've got, in some places we're on generator power, so we're restoring power, reconstituting our operations, but we are pretty much back to what I would call normal operational posture for the Coast Guard in Puerto Rico.
Please go ahead.
Hi there, this is Nicole Skanger with CBS News. Thank you so much, everyone, for doing this call. I have a question for the Assistant Administrator Bank and a follow-up for Rear Admiral McPherson, if that's okay. Assistant Administrator, some disaster modeling firms estimate Hurricane Ian has likely caused well over $100 billion in damage. I understand that FEMA probably doesn't have an estimate yet, but do you agree roughly with that assessment? Can you speak to the process of assessing damage? And can you also speak to efforts to restore access to places that have just been completely decimated, including Sanibel Island, leveling expectations? When can residents expect to return?
Yeah, absolutely. Our priorities, as we discussed in the front line, safety, life safety support through search and rescue. We are now starting to conduct assessments to the very point you're making, which is what will the cost be? How can we develop projects with all of the eligible applicants to get that work going as soon as possible, that permanent work. So we're actively assessing that now. So it's too early to tell exactly what the level of the damage will be, but we can certainly follow up in the future. In relation to areas that are isolated, that's certainly a priority of the states and ours. We're supporting them in their efforts to provide commodities to those areas. Prioritization of temporary roadways and bridges will certainly be at the top of mind as the recovery effort is undertaken.
Thank you. And Admiral McPherson, in Florida, you mentioned the primary concern right now are individuals who are stranded. Do you have a sense of how many remain stranded and are awaiting rescue still from U.S. Coast Guard and its partners? And do you have the latest number for U.S. Coast Guard rescues?
Yeah, so first of all, latest Coast Guard rescues is a little over 400. and 100 pets, about 100 pets that have also been rescued. Again, that's just one part of the broader search and rescue effort that's gone on. About 4,000, I think was the last number I saw, of people evacuated and rescued from land, air, and sea. As far as how many still remain, I don't have a good estimate on that. I know the state is looking at that. In addition to that, the state has established a website where people can go to www.floridadisaster.org/info. It's a one-stop shopping for everything. If somebody is missing a loved one, they can put that information there, and officials can follow up. We did blanket that area, particularly in Sanibel yesterday, along with the National Guard. A lot of people were moved out of there. We're now working with the state. The state is actually leading an effort to look at establishing a what would I call it, sort of, and maybe the Army Corps can help me with this, but we're going to use barges. They're going to use barges so that they can move equipment, materials there to finish, surveying that area to make sure that nobody needs assistance that might still be there. Just based on my own observation yesterday and an overflight with General Hibner, that area is going to be out of commission for some time. It was hit very hard. It does not have water. It does not have the basic infrastructure. I think some people might have thought they could stay there for a little while. I think after camping out there after about a night or two, they're realizing that's not a viable option. So the state is working to get those people to safety and put them in a stable location, reunify them with families, and then we'll do the. I'm sure the state will, with the support of FEMA, will do the hard work of recovery.
Thank you.
Again, as a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. Next caller, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Bianca Padro from the Miami Herald. I was just wondering if you can give an estimate, if you have any idea of how many people have been displaced and are currently in shelters, as well as whether FEMA is going to be providing trailers or any other temporary housing for people who've been displaced through any FEMA programs in the near future.
Yeah, so we know now, and certainly would like the Red Cross to jump in as well, but we know there's a census and sheltering of roughly 10,000 right now. Certainly more folks displaced than what is in, revealed as the shelter number. And we're certainly working all recovery efforts concurrently with the response efforts. One of those discussions will certainly be around housing efforts, so too early to provide any specifics or lines of effort or action, but we'll certainly circle back with you when we're there.
I concur with that from the American Red Cross. We can say roughly about 10,000 people yesterday stayed in shelters at about a dozen or so shelters. So, yes, I concur with that.
And can you clarify where exactly the populations are concentrated in, mostly Southwest Florida, Central Florida?
Yeah, mainly the Southeast Florida area, but Red Cross, any more specifics you'd like to provide there? Or Southwest, I'm sorry.
As far as, I apologize for the follow-up, but as far as the population, as far as in the actual shelters?
Correct, yeah.
So I think it's spread out. I mean, it's spread out across the entire state of Florida, basically. We have shelters about everywhere. If you visit the emergency Red Cross app, you can actually view the shelters where they're at. As far as the count, they vary by location. There's no one centralized population.
Thank you. And just to clarify for the FEMA question, in terms of actual programs available with temporary housing, those are not getting started at this time, or sorry if you already answered that.
Yeah, so we're working closely with the state on how to tackle all recovery issues, including housing. Those discussions have started or are ongoing, but no resolutions to those discussions yet, but we can follow up when there are.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
This is John Hackworth with the Daily Sun. Appreciate you taking the call. Some of the people that we've talked to that were trying to get a hold of FEMA yesterday said they were having a lot of trouble with calling in. They are asked to go online, and the call's disconnected, and then online they're having trouble with the numbers, the code they have to type in, and so on. So, is that a problem you're hearing from a lot of people, or is that just kind of just a few people that we're hearing from? And also, a second part to that question, I understand you're going to have locations in Northport and maybe elsewhere in Sarasota and Charlotte and Lee counties where people can come in and talk to FEMA in person. And I just wonder when you'll know where those will be and when they will open.
Yes, sir, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Not only do we have, 3 mechanisms to apply for assistance through that FEMA app, through the online website or the phone line, but we also have disaster survivor assistance teams on the ground in shelters helping folks with technical assistance in the registration process, providing next steps. They're also moving into neighborhoods as that becomes safe. So the message there is we are there. We'll continue to be there. We will be going door to door, but beyond that, we will be setting up in conjunction and at the direction of the state disaster recovery centers. I don't have the details on the planning efforts with me now, but we can follow up once those locations are identified and those openings are set.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate that.
This is Amy Williams with the News Press in Fort Myers. Do we know yet what the housing will be? Are FEMA trailers still a thing? Will it be hotel rooms? Where exactly will people who need shelter go to live for the long-term, long-haul recovery?
Yeah, so right now, again, we're focused on the life safety efforts, ensuring folks have safe and sanitary sheltering options for a temporary period of time. Again, that work is ongoing with the state. They have long-term options that we'll have to work through with them on how to really go about this. But we're in the early days of the response and certainly in the recovery as well. So as those efforts become fleshed out, we'll certainly share more.
And just to follow up, to be clear, I think I heard this in the last question, but you are establishing freestanding centers on the ground locations where people can go if they're wrestling with the app or online or on the cell, right?
Yes, as part of any declared disaster, we work with the state or affected entities to ensure that disaster recovery centers are stood up, which are brick and mortar sites to provide assistance for individuals. But again, that is part of it. The other part of it is that disaster survivor assistance team effort that meets the survivors where they are as well.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Julia Musto. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm with Fox News. I am wondering how prepared your agencies feel to handle another catastrophic event like Ian, considering that hurricane season runs through the end of November.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We're built for this. This is what we do. We have many levers at our disposal. We have a large cadre of reservists that are really the backbone of this agency that do the work in the field every day post-disaster. We also have a surge capacity force that was authorized by the Secretary of DHS, which also frees up interagency volunteers to help support efforts. We have many tools at our disposal to also include local hires, which bring competency around the areas that we're serving. So there's many tools at our disposal, and we're ready, and this is what we do.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Dana Harpster from WGCU in Fort Myers. We're NPR for Southwest Florida. I have not been to the main affected areas that I know of, but we are still not seeing specifically people a lot on the ground doing a whole lot, to be honest. So can you tell me where exactly geographically efforts are concentrated right now on storing power and water?
Yeah, from a FEMA perspective, and I certainly defer to others on the specifics, we have 2,000 employees in the ground in Florida in the affected areas providing support to this incident. We're also part of the Unified Command, as the Coast Guard outlined, for search and rescue efforts with state, local officials, and of course across the federal family. That effort is, a wide area search, but also a door-to-door repeat search to ensure that all folks and areas are cleared from areas, especially if they're unsafe or in need of assistance. So that work is ongoing. We have a large footprint there, and as the Army Corps mentioned, also assessing for power restoration efforts, as well as other key critical safety activities.
Please go ahead. Moving on to our next caller.
Hi. Hello. This is Dan Chang with Kaiser Health News, and I want to thank you for taking for having this call and for taking my question. It's for FEMA and probably the Army Corps of Engineers, but I wanted to ask if you could give us an update on access to drinking water. How many people are without access to drinking water? How long before running water is restored? And I was hoping you might be able to give us a little bit more details on healthcare facilities. I understand some hospitals have been evacuated, but that others perhaps are being provided water deliveries. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah. To that end, yes, we're working closely with the state to provide bulk water delivery to ensure not only supply for the general population, but of course critical facility, particularly hospitals, as you mentioned. At this time, we understand at least 145 healthcare facilities have been impacted. Those damage assessments are in progress and ongoing, so it's likely the number will change over time. But on the hospital front, we know of 10 fully evacuated operating emergency departments only at this time, 9 fully evacuated, 4 closed, and 2 emergency department only. So there are impacts to the hospital system. We're addressing those through bulk water delivery and also working extremely closely with the Army Corps of Engineers to assess not only the issues with the water treatment facility, but to expedite the repairs to those so folks can have that sustainable water source. I defer to the Army Corps for any other specifics.
Yes, and I was dropped from the call earlier. Am I back on?
I can hear you.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're providing that technical assistance, as it was just referenced, to the Lee County water supply, and that's a issue of transmission lines specifically, and what we have is because of the buoyancy of the transmission lines for the water and the unprecedented amount of water that we have coming up, we're having some bending and some breaking of those lines, and we're providing technical assistance for the repair of those lines. The actual repairs is actually being done by the county, and it's actually a multiple county effort under some emergency management agreements, and those repairs should be getting underway very soon. In terms of providing power in particular for hospitals, that is designated by FEMA as our number one priority for providing temporary emergency power. We are just getting now, as the assessments are coming in, our first list of what those requirements are, and we'll be prepared to, as soon as today, provide that point power to the hospitals and other healthcare type facilities that are in need of it.
And if I may, just a quick follow-up about the healthcare facilities. I believe it was the FEMA administrator who mentioned the ones that have been evacuated. I was wondering, specifically long-term, dialysis centers perhaps, and what happens to folks who do need long-term care and whose facilities, or perhaps a nursing home, has been basically destroyed? Where do they go?
Yeah, so overall, there's been an effort to decompress across the systems in all those areas. Again, our main focus is water and power. As those decompression efforts continue, we'll continue to address any needs that arise beyond what we're already provisioning for those medical facilities. So as of right now, those are the numbers, but it's certainly a dynamic issue that we're continuing to track closely and work with our Army Corps partners to address.
And I'm sorry, did you say the number of people who had been evacuated from healthcare facilities, perhaps even long-term ones?
I don't have that number with me, but we can follow up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
This is John Hackworth again with the Daily Sun. I don't at all want to sound critical, and this is probably a question you can't answer, but I noticed we haven't seen, unlike the other questioner from Lee County a while ago, we also haven't seen any power trucks or power line repairs going on in our area at all, out in the really hard-hit area in Englewood and Charlotte County and places like that. And I noticed the FPL map today showed that the East Coast is pretty much restored, and most of the West Coast, about 80% of the West Coast, it said still being assessed. I don't know if y'all are working with FP&L or if that's a question that you can't answer that I have to direct to them or not, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, we know the state is working very hard with the investor-owned utilities and the co-ops with that mutual aid force of 44,000 across the areas we discussed. So we'll certainly, while it's not in our area, we'll certainly raise that to the state to ensure that they're aware of your comment and your question, and that can be addressed if necessary.
I appreciate it.
Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi, this is Aaron Pellish with CNN. I just have two questions really quick. One for General McPherson. You mentioned that 400 people had been rescued, and then also separately referenced that 4,000 people had been rescued in a broader search. Can you delineate between the two categories that you're referencing there? And then a question for Ann with FEMA. Can you just briefly touch on what your evaluations and your staffing assessments are for the landfall in South Carolina and North Carolina, and what type of resources are being dedicated, or is that too early to say?
Okay, so this is Admiral McPherson regarding the search and rescue. In total, all agencies, federal, state, and local, the last number I saw was about 4,000 citizens have been rescued through land and sea and air. A subset of that, I'm speaking just for the Coast Guard, both from our helicopters and from our shallow water teams, we've rescued about 400 people. I'd say the large majority of those are from the barrier islands that were cut off from the mainland part of Florida. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and this is Ann. As far as South Carolina and North Carolina, those emergency declarations that the President approved authorizes the Federal Coordinating Officer to deploy and work closely with those states in each of their emergency operations centers. They're currently embedded with their teams working on any assessments that South Carolina and North Carolina are undertaking. We're tracking closely power restoration. There have been some outages across the board, but we're synced up closely with South Carolina and North Carolina. They're ongoing damage assessments now, and we'll continue to provide updates as we get the information.
We do not have any more questions in the queue.
All right, thank you, ma'am, and thank you, everybody, once again for joining today's call. As mentioned earlier, for any follow-up questions, feel free to contact the FEMA News Desk via email at FEMA-news-desk@fema.dhs.gov. Thanks again for your time today, and signing off.
That concludes today's call. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.